In a lot of ways, I think that the story of 2020 is in some ways a story of hubris on the Democrats' part, but also just being forced into a situation where we couldn't use our best weapons, which is our field operation. It was the first time since Obama changed the whole field game that the Republicans have knocked on more doors than the Democrats. And like you said, we had huge success in upstate New York. We flipped the state Senate. We elected the most rural member of the state Senate in the majority Democratic caucus. But she lost re-election, and we lost our canvassing operation, and she lost by a number of votes that was, order of magnitudes less than the number of doors who were knocked on in 2018. So this is only amplified by the fact that, as Jacob said, it was a perfect storm. So I don't think that we can necessarily count on all these same voters turning right back out again. So I think the story moving forward is going to be, especially as we look at all these state houses that we lost that will now be gerrymandered, and these, subtle but colossal losses that the Democrats did, endure, that we thought when we thought we were going to have a landslide win, as being really like, we won, but there are also some subtler messages, saying, have caution. The midterms are always way harder, even if you do win. And we really need to double back down on canvassing and those kind of things, because those are relationships that are built over years. And having missed an election cycle, it's that much more work that we need to do, especially because the Republicans never stopped canvassing. And in many ways, they caught right up to us.
So Colin, how is Next Gen going to update or sort of change their strategy looking towards 2022? Have you guys already started talking about this, or as it relates to the major difference that between 2018 and now? I don't know if you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, well, hopefully next year we'll be able to, have more of a field presence than we did last year. So I think that will help things a lot. Of course, as was mentioned, midterm elections tend to not get as much excitement, and especially because we have, an incumbent in the White House on the progressive side. We are expecting that we'll need to kind of, get things that'll really excite younger voters. So, at Next Gen, we're doing campaign on, student debt cancellations and, action on climate change. And I think showing real results in kind of those areas, I think are the things that can hopefully get young people to turn out again. And I think the other thing, especially in Pennsylvania, when we're looking to next year, is last year with the adoption of mail-in voting and kind of the expansion of that, I think that really changed the game. And we're really hoping that we can kind of improve ballot access both in Pennsylvania and kind of across the nation. And that's why, we really think it's important, kind of federally, we're doing pushes around the For the People Act and other kind of ways that we can kind of protect, access to the ballot box, so we can avoid, gerrymandering and other kind of restrictions that will, kind of make it harder next year for everyone.
Do you think it's going to be harder though without Colin, without Trump as someone to point to as this enemy, as this figure who sort of, I mean, he drove so many people I know who weren't political, who were politically apathetic to the polls. How do you run a campaign without that as the thing to point to? I mean, now it's just sort of based on what Biden has done up until now, which is a totally different sort of thing there. Jacob, you could also go ahead if you want, then Colin.
Colin, do you want to answer first, or can I?
All right, sure.
Yeah, go ahead, Jacob.
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. I think that's the fundamental question, right, regarding the youth vote is, what are we going to do in the post-Trump era? But unfortunately, what the Republicans have created for us is they've turned every single election into the most important election of our lives, right? They, or at least it's clear to me, are very intent on destroying democracy in whatever form that takes. They may think that they're saving it, but they are very hell-bent on destroying our American system. If we lose the House in 22 or 24, right, we already saw them try to do the playbook for this, and then the Democrats win the White House in 24, what will stop them from not certifying that election? Right? So yeah. They have transformed every election into the most important election of our lifetime, because the systems of our democracy are hanging by a thread. And my question for young people everywhere is, were you more afraid of Trump or what that leads us to? Because the answer is the same. What it leads us to is that same destination where we're not living in the multiracial democracy that we're all working to create. And the thing is that we will either become a multiracial democracy that works long term, or we will fall apart. And so my question for people, for especially young voters in 24, will be, or 22 and then 24, will be, do you want to continue working for this vision of a multiracial democracy, or did you just not like Trump?
Mhm.
Yeah, and Ben, to your question, I don't think, I think Democrats and progressives have over relied on using, Trump as the boogeyman. I think young people especially like need to see a real vision and a platform that will like actually improve lives, because I think for so many years they haven't seen improvement on a lot of the issues that they care about, and they want more substantive like change. So I don't think we can rely on using Trump anymore. I think we need to really run on a very bold vision, and I think like that's what will actually get people to vote, especially young people.
So I wanted to ask all three of you what the difference is between, say, running a youth-oriented campaign in a place like New York, or a liberal place, or a place like Center County or New York 19, where Eli is from, and where I did another project. These are areas that are purple, right? But they're similar because they have college towns and towns that are centers of young people, and often surrounded by rural farming communities and small towns. So like, how does that change the like youth organizing and targeting, like when you're working in an area that might be considered more purple, as opposed to like, a big city? I'll start with you, Eli.
Well, specifically when it comes to reliance on college towns, that can be really tricky. Like particularly in this last election, SUNY New Paltz, the voter turnout at the SUNY New Paltz precinct, which is the college town within New York 19, but also within SD 42, the Senate district, which is the most critical swing district in the state, basically. Attendance in person was way down, and most of the people were out of district in the city. And if we had had the same number of votes on SUNY New Paltz as we had in 2018, the election would have been ours probably. So it was a really critical factor. So that kind of reliance on, this is not really a grand answer to your question, but it just speaks to the tenuousness of these kind of situations and the impact of college campuses on races and districts.
So Colin, what's different about organizing in Pennsylvania, or central Pennsylvania, as opposed to anywhere else in the country? I mean, Pennsylvania is already a swing state. It was one of the most important states we knew going into this election. It's always been identified, and young people are always poised to have a big impact there. But what's different about organizing there?
Yeah, I mean, I think like what makes Center County stand out, and Pennsylvania in general, is of course because of its like swing state status, and that's definitely true to Center County as well. I think there is that infrastructure that maybe is lacking in other areas. I think there are so many different groups that are doing great organizing work in Center County and across Pennsylvania, and I think that has been key year to year to kind of keep that momentum going. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So Jacob, you were really on the ground there. What was it? What's it like? I mean, why is it different? What's different about organizing there as opposed to anywhere else?
You know what? Thinking back on it's kind of like a fever dream. I feel like we did all this work in a bubble.
Yeah.
In like this world that was perfectly crafted for like because of the pandemic, it was a world that will probably, hopefully, knock on wood, only happen once. I don't know that any of us want to go through that again in our lifetimes. Whatever, like coronavirus 25, coronavirus 33, like I think coronavirus 19 was good enough for all of us. And I think that really created an interesting environment in 20. But I think the experience is more like what it would be in 18, right? Where you use the students as a padding because the students are there, right? In 20, a lot of students didn't come back, as I mentioned in the documentary. And if you didn't come back, you probably lean more liberal to begin with. And a lot of those students who did come back, because of the protests, had already requested mail-in ballots at their home addresses. So they voted. And we can see that in the numbers, that the youth voted. They didn't necessarily vote on campus. So usually, right, the youth vote in Center County is the backbone on which you build everything else. This year, it was like a padding, right? The padding that just put us over on beating the Republicans, for again, because I think we beat them in Center County in 16 and we beat them in 12. So this year it was a padding as opposed to the foundation. But I would say in 2018, when you look back, it was foundational to helping Center County elect Wolf and Fetterman and Bob Casey, right? And usually what you do is, because students are going to vote blue, you recruit students to go knock in surrounding areas, right? And to do that voter outreach, both to their peers, right, but also to our neighboring communities. Not even just in Center County. I remember taking some car rides out to some surrounding counties, knocking doors there. I remember once I knocked doors in Mifflin County. It's a beautiful area. The people are fun. No matter where you go in Central Pennsylvania, you will find fundamentally good people who, even if you disagree, right, you can find some common ground on values, even if you differentiate in the end result. And you just keep pushing and doing that in-person work. Students, I'm sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought there at the end. But I think that kind of answers the question as a whole. Is there anything else you'd like me to talk about specifically?
No. I mean, that was great. I was just, I just wanted people to get sort of an understanding of why this can be so different depending on where you're working, because there's so many people that, for example, live in New York City or some other big city like Chicago or somewhere on the East Coast, where it's sort of everyone is sort of very in consensus.
Yeah.
And those people might not really understand what it's like to work in an area that truly could go either way and has gone either way. And we saw, so strangely, so many of these areas go from actually voting for Obama to voting for Trump, which to me was one of the strangest things that's happened. And it happened all across Pennsylvania. So it's just amazing that someone could vote for Obama and then vote for Trump. And then a lot of those people did end up voting for Joe Biden, which I guess maybe just speaks to what was going on in 2016. But it's kind of an interesting thing. But it also changes, right, like Jacob, like how you were working, right?
Yeah.
That understanding. But I wanted to ask everyone how they would rate Joe Biden so far on youth-focused issues, and whether or not you think young people in general will be satisfied, going into 2022. I mean, he did make a lot of promises towards the end there that maybe not all have come true, but maybe he's working on it. And I'm also wondering, Colin, if you can comment as to how you're trying to put pressure, or not pressure, but trying to sort of communicate to Biden what these youth-focused issues might be. But we'll start with Eli just to keep it synchronized.
Sure. I think that Joe Biden is doing a pretty decent job considering where he stands politically. Even just on a broader front, like, you have sort of two things going on, where on the one hand, it's exceptionally hard to hold your ground or gain seats in the upcoming midterm election, which I see as basically a do or die moment for the Biden presidency. On the other hand, the last person who did it, they assumed the presidency in the midst of, it was FDR. He gained seats in his first midterm election, which was the first time that had basically ever happened. And we're in a similar economic situation. We're at the midst of a downturn, and we have a president who is interested in performing serious public works and like major legislative packages to like get things moving, use Keynesian economics and get the economy moving, and provide real material answers to a lot of people's issues that are going on. So I think at the end of the day, beyond messaging, which is an area where Biden will check some boxes, but maybe never get to his original strength with young people as, the sort of, Christ-like figure of the opposition to Trump. I think his success is really going to come down to the following months and how much of these huge legislative packages he's proposed he can actually pass, and whether or not his budget reflects the spirit of the original budget he put forth. And I think these material measures, if he really is going to be the next New Deal and having packages like that, he doesn't have the same kind of foreign policy rah-rah momentum that FDR had. But
do you actually see them gaining seats do you actually see the Democrats gaining seats in 2022? Is that realistic, or is that?
I mean, it's on the unlikely kind of end of the bell curve, but like just as I thought of 2020 and 2018, I see a successful election for Democrats maintaining a supermajority being the definition of successful in 2022 as being just a do or die. It's like one of those things where it's like the odds don't matter, you just have to do it. Um, I think it's possible that we hold our supermajority. I think that gerrymandering alone is going to make that a serious challenge, and we're going to have to do the equivalent of gain seats. And I think we just have to accept the fact that we have to repeat a historical moment and be the second example ever of an example like this, because the moment just requires it. We don't have the time on climate change anymore. We can't lose the midterms because the Republicans will let the planet burn. And on so many other issues, it's just, this is it. It's like Han Solo, don't tell me the odds. It's like, at this point, we just have to win.
Yeah, Colin. So I was wondering, maybe you could comment on how Next Gen is sort of looking, if they see, or if you see this as 2022 as a do or die, and how Next Gen is sort of grading Biden's performance so far and using his performance to get young people to still come out, or to understand the importance of the midterms. And
I mean, I think, right now we're all about holding the people that we elected last year accountable. And, Joe Biden, ran on this progressive platform, the most progressive platform of any major, Democratic nominee in history. And now we, expect him to keep his promises. So what we're doing is, putting pressure on him to cancel student debt. And, right now, we're doing stuff around the American Jobs Plan, which, as he proposed, would make, historic investments in fighting the climate crisis. But, I think we're a little frustrated with his, time spent negotiating with Republicans. We really want him to move forward with the most ambitious version of that plan. And I think we're also kind of seeing some, setbacks with, voting rights when it comes to the For the People Act, and some of the reluctance to, make reforms to the filibuster so we can actually, pass this agenda that he ran on in the Senate. So, I think, the next year is going to be really critical to seeing, what promises he can keep, and what we'll be able to run on it on 2022, to kind of like name the things that he actually succeeded. So right now, I think, we're happy with a lot of, the progress that we've made, but it's not enough to just not be Trump. You need to really deliver. And I think that's what young people expect.
Jacob, how happy are you with Joe so far? I know you actually worked the campaign. You can't necessarily comment on that, but how satisfied are you just personally so far with that? How he's doing, and compared to November, when it was just Biden fever, did you feel like that's sort of come down a little bit? I mean, I know a lot of young people, he wasn't necessarily their first choice, but they voted for him nonetheless. I know, but you said you were Joe from day one, I believe.
No, so I was Warren, then Sanders.
You were Warren, then Sanders.
I voted for Sanders in the primary, and then voted for Joe.
Oh, okay. But you were still Joe from pretty early on compared to some.
I was Joe from when it was over, when he won the nomination, it was time to get behind the Democratic nominee. I said for months before that, like, whoever the Democratic nominee would be, I'm gonna support them. And I think we've seen why that was important. One of the things that you want from your government, right? Like the basic bare bones job of your government is, one, to protect you, and two, to make sure that your day-to-day life does not get disrupted, right? And I think under Trump, we saw a massive day-to-day of our lives getting disrupted in that last year. And I think the best advantage of the Biden presidency is that we're getting back on track, right? Our economy is growing back slowly but surely. Tomorrow, I'm going to a Mets game. A year ago, I had to pay $90 for a cardboard cutout that I wasn't going to be able to, that you would never be able to see again, right? Like, the coronavirus pandemic was infinitely worse because Donald Trump was president. There are about 150,000 people that were probably going to die no matter what. That's not on him, but the rest are on him. That's on him. That was his presidency. That was their goal. Their goal was not to have limited government. That's what conservatives always say, limited government. No, their goal was to have no government. And you saw firsthand what happens when you have a real crisis and you need government to help you, right? when it comes to that, getting back to what we want our quality of life to be, improving quality of life across the board. I don't think our vaccine rollout would have been as good under Trump. Frankly, I don't think we would have had a vaccine rollout. I was vaccinated back in March. If Trump were president, I don't know if I'd be vaccinated yet. Um, people are healthy, cases are dropping, we can start to do the things that we like to do again, like I mentioned, baseball games, whatever your thing is. And Ben, you're from New York, I'm from New York, the theater's coming back in September. That just makes me so happy. And on that front, I think Biden's doing a good job, right? On the front of restoring how we look in the eyes of the world. I saw a poll today that showed a bunch of major countries and their opinion of how Trump would do on world crises and how Biden would do on world crises. And Biden has gained 50 points in every single country. People believe in us again to do the right thing, right? And on those two fronts, I'm very happy with the Biden presidency. Now, he made a lot of promises that he has to follow through on, that there are a couple members of our Senate caucus who are kind of getting in the way of that. If they continue to get in the way of that, the heat death of democracy will be on them. If we do not pass voting rights reform in some way before 22, if we don't take some action on jobs, I think earlier this year we had that minimum wage vote where a senator, on our side, on the Democratic side, took pride in voting no on raising the minimum wage. These are the changes that I think the entire party has to make. And I think they're getting in the way of what could be a much more progressive presidency.
Well, thanks. I guess I'll just wrap it. If you want, I was going to wrap it up.
I was just going to tack on one thing
sure.
to that, which is that the work that, for instance, Next Gen is doing in holding Biden accountable is so critical right now. And we cannot always have he's the nominee mindset. There's a natural cycle that we have to go through. Like, for instance, I think that Biden became an infinitely stronger candidate because he had to stand on a debate stage with Kamala and Bernie and Warren and all of them. And we have to go through a similar process now where in reality our success is not going to come from our unity during the presidency. Yes, we should spread the news about our wins and we should be organized in doing so, but our success is going to come from the material advancements that we make in people's lives. And that is the product of feedback and grievance and democratic processes and the way our institutions are supposed to work. So it's our pressure that we put and our criticism of Biden now that could get him elected in the future, because it's making our voices heard and allowing those democratic processes to function that is really what's gonna get us the win. So it's not necessarily just about supporting the man, it's about what we came here to do and putting the pressure on our elected officials to get it done and show that we mean business.
Well, this has been great. I'm just going to ask one final question that each of you can answer. Essentially, I mean, we already kind of touched on it a little bit, but youth vote was up this year by a pretty good amount. But how do we make it so that we go up by another 10% in 2022? How do we not only make young, I mean, I know it's a bit of a pipe dream, right? I mean, midterms, it's tough, but how do we make it so that we see this chart continue to look like that as opposed to a dip and then a rise again? I mean, all of you have said that this is such an important, this is a do or die. So how do we continue to get young people, not only in a midterm, but have them understand this isn't just a regular midterm. This is different. So how do you keep the numbers going? And I also wanted each of you to sort of add what you're going to be doing just a little bit in the next couple of years. I mean, Colin, I know you work for Next Gen, but just individually, and then we'll sort of wrap it up. So we'll start with Eli, even though you just spoke, and then go to Colin.
Sure. First of all, we don't skip any steps. Every young person that voted in 2020, we have decent data on them. Some of them will be Republicans, so we need to start calling through them even earlier, start texting through them even earlier, sorting out which ones of them voted for us, figuring out why they did it, and making sure we give them what they need to do it again. Those gains that we made, we don't necessarily have to fully remake them. We have that data. We need to use the field operations that we are rekindling to make sure that they are given the extra nudge that they need to vote again. The hardest time to get somebody to vote is the first time. So that uptick gives us an advantage and something to build off of. for getting even more people, it's just engagement, engagement, engagement. You couldn't, like everything from the black squares to BLM to protests, you couldn't not stand anywhere on issues in 2020. It was, the moral consequences of inaction were too in your face, and there were people calling you out and showing you that your power translates to injustice if not used for good. So yeah, we just can't let up. And what I'm doing moving forward, obviously I still run Our Vote, so hopefully canvassing operations through them, although I might work with any number of campaigns. Our Vote was kind of a unique project, but yeah, it'll involve exactly the project, the processes I just mentioned, hitting people up again and again and again and telling them to vote.
And hopefully in person, right? Knocking on doors.
True that.
The old massive field operation.
I'd like to do some big old rallies with QR codes everywhere and just register people on their phones by the gazillions, and you know, we'll see what happens.
Okay, Colin, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, when I'm looking, towards next year, I think one thing that'll really determine whether or not, youth turnout, continues to be high or decreases is, I think, whether or not we make it easier to vote or harder. And I think, right now you're seeing, over 400 pieces of voter suppression bills in state legislatures all across the country. And, that's something that I'm incredibly worried about. And, I think at Next Gen, we're hoping to push back on, so we can, make it easier for young people and students to vote, next year. So continue access to mail-in balloting and continued access to, on campus, voting on campus. So those are things we're looking at. I think, just in general, investing early in all of these elections and all these communities is really important. There's no such thing as an off year, and we really need to use, this year as a way to start those conversations and dialogues and do a better job of communicating, both what we're doing and what we'll do in the future. So yeah, I think that's what we're looking at, and there's a lot of work left to be done.
I just wanted to ask you one follow-up, Colin. I know that like mail-in and the accessibility was a huge part of why youth turnout was high, especially in states that had that. Is there any way to replicate that going forward? I mean, or was that all just something that was under just because of COVID?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of states are keeping some of those, more expansive mail-in ballot rules, and I think Pennsylvania is one of them. So that's encouraging. But I think other states also, especially with Republican state legislatures, have started rolling back some of those ways that they made it easier to vote last year. So I think that's just something to keep an eye on, and I think it will make a big difference.
Okay, Jacob, my original question to you was, I don't know if you still remember, but it was just basically what you're going to be doing over the next couple of years, and whether or not you think it's reasonable to expect that youth voter turnout will still be going up, in 2022, or if that's just a pipe dream. So
yeah, so I don't know what I'm personally gonna be doing. I'm right now in the middle of a job search. I hope wherever I am, I get to personally talk to every single youth voter in the town, county, state,
Sure you will be.
Yeah. But my biggest advice to the Democratic Party is pay young organizers and pay them well, right? At Penn State,
I'm pretty sure all three of you can agree with that, right?
yeah, at Penn State, we had a massive issue this past year, that there was a long time that it was me and one other person organizing campus alone, right? And then with
that's tens of thousands of people.
There were two of us trying to organize 40,000 people by ourselves, right? And unfortunately, this is horrible to say, but after the death of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, there was enough money to pay interns. And we were able to put together a team of 8 people, and our output increased dramatically because we had people that were happy, they were getting paid. And when you are getting paid, you are a lot happier to tell your friends whatever, because there's money entering your bank account. Especially because, hey, you want to go out to dinner this weekend? And let me tell you why I can afford to pay for this dinner, right? So young people are much happier when anyone is much happier when they're getting paid. Young people have a set of skills that are unique. We understand social media. We understand how to weaponize it, or not weaponize it, but to use it to get our friends out to vote, right? Pay them for that knowledge. They have a knowledge that older generations, frankly, and this is not to be rude, do not have. It's It's just they don't understand, Instagram algorithms and how to use Snapchat in the same way that we do. Pay them, pay us. If you pay young organizers, they will get your youth vote out for you and you will win. So that's my big advice. If you want a spike in the youth vote, hire more young people. And I guarantee you they're going to get you across the finish line.
I want to respond with that and just say, never buy a billboard again. Spend the $3K on an FO. It'll always get you more votes, one.
Yeah.
And two, never spend money on a Kentucky Senate race again. Spend it all on FOs, an army for the whole country. All our problems will be solved.
Yeah. That's another big piece of advice. I mean, we could talk for hours about that, but don't spend money on like the big ticket Senate races. Send them to your state party or to local candidates. Start at the bottom. I genuinely believe that politics are trickle up, right? You can't start at the top and expect the votes to come down. They have to make connections with Democrats in their neighborhood, right? With their local town council person, with their local county commissioners, because those are the Democrats that they know. And when they know that Democrats aren't, part of, and this is like, these are real stories. Like, they're not running child sex shops out of pizza parlors, but they're your neighbor, right? Who genuinely cares about you. They're going to go out and vote Democrat because you're going to bust through whatever perceptions they're getting on Facebook, right? One last note, I want to say that in 2022, Pennsylvania is going to do their part in helping Biden's majority. We're going to elect a Democratic senator. I don't know which candidate it's going to be yet, but I'm guaranteeing it right now, and it's going to be because of Pennsylvania's youth vote.